Beneath the crushing ice of Greenland, a chilling Cold War secret lay buried for decades. An entire city, hidden from the world, engineered for nuclear Armageddon. Welcome to the Purple Files. If you enjoy our videos, please consider subscribing to the channel. Let's get right into it. So, why Greenland? Of all the desolate, remote corners of the Earth, why did this colossal island of ice become the unlikely stage for such an audacious and secretive military gamble? The answer lies in a chilling confluence of geography, Cold War paranoia, and the nascent understanding of Arctic possibilities. Imagine for a moment a globe. Trace the shortest path between the industrial and military heartlands of the United States and its great adversary, the Soviet Union. That path arches directly over the Arctic, over the North Pole. In an age where long-range bombers was still a primary means of delivering nuclear devastation, and intercontinental ballistic missiles were rapidly becoming the ultimate deterrent, the Arctic wasn't a frozen wasteland. It was the new strategic frontier. It was, quite literally, the high ground in a global standoff. Greenland, the world's largest island, sits squarely in this critical Arctic corridor. Its sheer size, over 836,000 square miles, mostly covered by an ice sheet thousands of feet thick, offered a tantalizing prospect to American military planners. It was vast, it was sparsely populated, almost an empty quarter of the world, making it an ideal location for activities that needed to remain far from prying eyes, far from civilian populations, and far from the prying lenses of Soviet reconnaissance. But it wasn't just about emptiness. Greenland's geographical position made it an unsinkable aircraft carrier, a stationary platform of immense strategic value. From bases in Greenland, American bombers could reach deep into Soviet territory. Early warning radar systems, vital for detecting incoming Soviet attacks, could be positioned to provide precious extra minutes of reaction time. Minutes that could mean the difference between retaliation and annihilation. And the United States already had a significant foothold. During the Second World War, after Denmark fell under German occupation, the United States had taken on the responsibility of defending Greenland to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. This wartime presence evolved. In 1951, a pivotal defense agreement was signed between the United States and Denmark, which held sovereignty over Greenland. This agreement granted the Americans the right to establish and operate defense areas on the island. The most famous of these was Thule Air Base, a massive air power projection hub constructed in the far northwest, a testament to American engineering and resolve in the harshest of environments. So, the Americans were already there. They understood the immense logistical challenges of operating in the Arctic, and they had the legal framework, however broadly interpreted at times, to expand their activities. But Project Iceworm envisioned something far beyond conventional air bases or radar stations. It looked at the ice sheet itself, not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity, a colossal natural bunker. The thinking was that facilities, and even mobile missile launchers, could be buried deep within the ice, concealed from aerial and satellite surveillance, protected from the elements, and perhaps even shielded from the effects of a nuclear blast. The constantly accumulating snow, it was believed, would naturally entomb these installations ever deeper, making them virtually undetectable. Greenland's ice wasn't just a place to hide on, it was a place to hide within. This unique characteristic, combined with its strategic location, made Greenland the chillingly logical, if incredibly challenging, choice for a project as secret and as ambitious as a hidden nuclear arsenal aimed at the Soviet Union. So, with Greenland selected as the frozen stage, the United States Army embarked on a truly monumental undertaking. The public face of this endeavor was Camp Century, officially presented to the world, and indeed to many within the Danish government, as a pioneering scientific research station. Its stated mission was to test construction techniques in deep ice, to study the harsh Arctic environment, and to explore the feasibility of human habitation under such extreme conditions. And to be fair, legitimate scientific research did occur there. But this was merely the tip of a colossal, icy iceberg of deception. The year was 1959. Under the command of the United States Army's Polar Research and Development Center, construction began at a desolate spot on the Greenland ice sheet, roughly 150 miles or 240 kilometers inland from Thule Air Base. The chosen method was ingenious yet brutal in its simplicity. The cut-and-cover technique. Giant Swiss-made rotary snow plows, machines of immense power, carved deep trenches into the unyielding ice. These trenches, some as deep as 26 feet or 8 meters and just as wide, would become the subterranean avenues of this hidden city. Once a trench was excavated to the desired depth and length, a massive, arched steel roof was erected over it. Then, the very snow and ice that had been removed was blown back on top, burying the structure, concealing it from above, and providing insulation against the savage Arctic winds and temperatures that could plummet to well below -50 degrees Fahrenheit, or -45 Celsius. Slowly, painstakingly, a network of these covered trenches began to take shape, forming a subterranean labyrinth. The main trench, aptly nicknamed Main Street, stretched for over 1,100 feet, longer than 3 American football fields laid end to end. Branching off from this central artery were numerous side tunnels, leading to prefabricated buildings nestled within the ice. And these weren't just crude shelters. Camp Century was designed to be a remarkably self-contained community. A city in miniature, all buried beneath the snow. Think about what they built there, deep in the frozen heart of the glacier. There were barracks to house up to 200 soldiers and scientists. There was a fully equipped hospital, complete with an operating room, ready for any medical emergency. A modern laboratory allowed for scientific experiments. For leisure and morale, incredibly, there was a theatre where movies were shown, a library for quiet contemplation, and even a chapel for spiritual need. A mess hall served hot meals, a post office connected the inhabitants to the distant world, and workshops kept the machinery running. There were even, for a time, individual private rooms for the personnel, a small comfort in an overwhelmingly alien environment. All of this connected by well-lit corridors of ice and steel, shielded from the perpetual polar night or the blinding summer sun. The lifeblood of this extraordinary city was its power source. To provide the necessary electricity and heat in such an isolated and resource-scarce location, Camp Century became home to the world's first portable nuclear reactor, designated the PM2A. This compact reactor, a marvel of 1950s atomic engineering, was assembled on-site and began generating power in 1960. It was a groundbreaking achievement, allowing the camp to operate with a degree of energy independence unimaginable with conventional diesel generators alone, which would have required a constant, perilous airlift of fuel. But it also introduced the unprecedented challenge of operating and eventually decommissioning a nuclear facility in one of the most remote and fragile environments on Earth. A life in Camp Century was a study in contrasts. On one hand, there was the cutting-edge technology, the relative comfort of the heated buildings, the camaraderie of a shared, unique mission. On the other, there was the profound isolation, the constant awareness of the thousands of feet of ice overhead, and the subtle, relentless movement of the glacier itself. The ice sheet is not static. It is a living river of ice, flowing, deforming, and exerting unimaginable pressures. Maintaining the integrity of the tunnels and buildings against this slow, crushing embrace was a constant battle for the Army engineers. Walls would bulge, ceilings would sag, and new snow would have to be continuous. Despite the challenges, valuable scientific work was indeed conducted. Most notably, Camp Century became the site of the first ever deep ice core drilling, retrieving samples from the very bedrock beneath the ice sheet. These ice cores, cylinders of ancient ice containing trapped air bubbles, dust, and isotopes, provided an invaluable, unprecedented record of past climate conditions, stretching back over 100,000 years. It was a profound contribution to our understanding of Earth's climate system, an ironic scientific byproduct of a facility conceived for war. For several years, Camp Century functioned, a bustling, hidden outpost of human ingenuity. But the ice, the very thing that offered concealment, was also its undoing. The dream of a stable, permanent city under the glacier was proving to be just that, a dream. While Camp Century bustled with its official scientific activities, its laboratories producing valuable data, its nuclear reactor humming, this was all, in essence, an elaborate and brilliantly executed cover story. The true, earth-shattering secret, hidden even deeper within the United States military and intelligence apparatus, was a plan codenamed Project Iceworm, and its objective was nothing short of turning the Greenland ice sheet into a colossal clandestine launchpad for hundreds of nuclear missiles. Imagine the strategic thinking of the late 1950s. The fear of a surprise Soviet nuclear attack was paramount. If the Soviets could destroy America's land-based missiles and bomber fleets in a devastating first strike, the ability to retaliate, and thus the core principle of deterrence, would be fatally compromised. The race was on to find ways to make nuclear arsenals survivable, hidden, and mobile. Submarines armed with ballistic missiles were one answer, but Project Iceworm proposed another, equally audacious solution on land, or rather, under it. The grand vision of Project Iceworm was breathtaking in its scope and terrifying in its implications. It called for the excavation of an astonishing 2,500 miles, that's 4,000 kilometers, of tunnels beneath the Greenland ice sheet. This vast subterranean network would house not just support facilities, but approximately 600 specially modified medium-range ballistic missiles. These missiles, each tipped with a powerful nuclear warhead, would be mounted on mobile launchers, constantly shifting their positions within the sprawling tunnel system. The strategic advantage, as envisioned by the planners, was immense. Buried deep beneath the ice, constantly on the move, this arsenal would be virtually undetectable by Soviet reconnaissance. Even if its general location was suspected, pinpointing individual missile launchers within thousands of miles of tunnels would be an almost impossible task. This would, in theory, guarantee a devastating second strike capability. A powerful deterrent against any Soviet aggression. The missiles, with a planned range of around 2,200 nautical miles, or just over 4,000 kilometers, could reach deep into the Soviet Union, striking key cities and military installations. To support this immense undertaking, the plan called for up to 60 separate missile launch complexes, each with multiple launch tubes, all interconnected by this vast web of tunnels. The city of Camp Century, with its nuclear reactor and its experience in under-ice construction and living, was essentially the pilot project, the proof of concept for this far grander, far more alarming scheme. The lessons learned at Camp Century in terms of engineering, logistics, and human endurance in the ice were directly intended to inform the rollout of the full Project Iceworm deployment. The level of secrecy surrounding Project Iceworm was absolute. Only a tiny handful of top military and government officials in the United States were privy to its true nature. Crucially, the Danish government, which held sovereignty over Greenland and had authorized Camp Century as a scientific station, was kept entirely in the dark about this planned nuclearization of their territory. This deception was a monumental gamble, one that, had it been exposed at the time, could have triggered a diplomatic crisis of epic proportions and severely damaged relations with a key North Atlantic Treaty Organization ally. The potential for international outcry, for accusations of violating Danish sovereignty and turning Greenland into a prime Soviet target, was enormous. Project Iceworm represented the Cold War mindset taken to its extreme, a technologically ambitious, incredibly expensive, and morally fraught solution to the problem of nuclear deterrence, pursued in utmost secrecy. It was a plan born of fear, a desperate attempt to gain an edge in a conflict where the stakes were the survival of civilization itself. The frozen, desolate expanse of Greenland was to become the hidden sword of Damocles, ready to strike from beneath a blanket of ancient ice. Building and maintaining even the relatively modest Camp Century, let alone the vast network envisioned for Project Iceworm, was an engineering challenge of unprecedented scale and complexity. The United States Army engineers and their civilian contractors were pioneers, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible in the most unforgiving environment on Earth. There were remarkable triumphs of ingenuity, but also, inevitably, formidable and ultimately insurmountable troubles. One of the earliest and most significant triumphs was the very construction method itself. The cut-and-cover technique, using those powerful Swiss snow-milling machines to carve trenches that were then roofed with steel arches and reburied, was a relatively rapid and effective way to create habitable space within the ice. It allowed for the creation of Main Street and the various offshoot tunnels that housed the camp's facilities, providing protection from the brutal surface condition. The prefabricated buildings, assembled within these icy caverns, offered a level of comfort and functionality that was astonishing given the location. The deployment of the PM2A portable nuclear reactor was another landmark achievement. Transporting the components of a nuclear reactor to such a remote Arctic location, assembling it and bringing it online to provide sustained power and heat was a testament to 1950s atomic age engineering. For several years, it reliably powered Camp Century, drastically reducing the immense logistical burden of constantly airlifting conventional fuel. This success was seen as a crucial enabler for the much larger energy demands that Project Iceworm would have entailed. Furthermore, the day-to-day operation of Camp Century itself, housing and supporting up to 200 personnel for extended periods, was a triumph of logistics and human adaptation. Developing systems for water supply, by melting the surrounding ice, waste disposal, initially into sumps carved into the ice, ventilation, and communication in such an isolated extreme environment required constant innovation and problem-solving. The scientific research conducted, particularly the ice core drilling that yielded invaluable climate data, was another significant, albeit secondary, success story born from the camp's existence. However, the engineers soon discovered that the Greenland ice sheet was not the static, stable platform they had initially hoped for. Glaciers, by their very nature, are rivers of ice, constantly in motion. They flow, they deform, they compress under their own immense weight. And this relentless movement became the Achilles heel of Camp Century, and the fatal flaw in the grand design of Project Iceworm. The trenches and the buildings within them began to experience significant deformation far sooner and more severely than anticipated. The carefully excavated tunnels started to narrow as the ice flowed and squeezed them. Ceilings sagged, walls bulged inward, and the structural integrity of the entire subterranean city was under constant threat. Maintaining the tunnels required continuous, labor-intensive re-excavation and reinforcement. It was a never-ending battle against the crushing power of the glacier. Measurements taken by the Army engineers revealed that the ice was moving and compressing at a rate that would render the tunnels unusable within a relatively short time frame. The initial estimate for the lifespan of the tunnels had been overly optimistic. The dream of a permanent, stable network of missile silos stretching for thousands of miles was literally being squeezed out of existence by the very ice that was supposed to protect it. Moreover, the extreme cold and the unique properties of snow and ice presented ongoing engineering challenges. Machinery broke down more frequently. Materials behaved differently at such low temperatures. Even the simple act of keeping entrances clear of constantly drifting snow was a major undertaking. By 1963, just a few years after Camp Century became fully operational, the data was undeniable. The rate of ice deformation was too great. The cost and effort required to maintain the existing tunnels, let alone expand them into the vast Iceworm network, would be astronomical and ultimately futile. The ice was winning. The grand ambition of a hidden nuclear fortress was being slowly, inexorably crushed. The triumphs of engineering had met their match in the quiet, irresistible power of the Greenland ice sheet. The dream of Project Iceworm, a hidden nuclear arsenal beneath the Greenlandic ice, was as audacious as it was secret. But even the most ambitious military plans must eventually collide with the hard realities of science, engineering, and shifting strategic landscapes. By the early 1960s, the grand vision of an icy fortress began to unravel. not due to any single catastrophic failure, but through a convergence of undeniable factors. The primary, and perhaps most decisive reason for Iceworm's demise was the ice itself. The very medium chosen for concealment and protection proved to be an insurmountable engineering adversary. As we've seen, the Greenland ice sheet is not a static monolith. It is a dynamic, flowing entity. The constant, relentless movement and deformation of the glacier meant that the carefully constructed tunnels at Camp Century were being slowly but inexorably squeezed and distorted. Army engineers, after meticulous study and direct observation, concluded that the rate of this deformation was far greater than initially anticipated. Maintaining the existing tunnels was already a Herculean task, requiring constant, costly reboring and reinforcement. To create and sustain the thousands of miles of tunnels envisioned for the full Project Iceworm deployment was deemed practically impossible and economically unsustainable. The ice was simply too powerful, too alive. The fortress would crush itself. Concurrent with these daunting engineering challenges, the strategic landscape of the Cold War was evolving. When Project Iceworm was first conceived in the late 1950s, land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICMs, were still relatively vulnerable, and the idea of a hidden, mobile, land-based arsenal held significant appeal. However, by the early to mid-1960s, technological advancements were rapidly changing the equation of nuclear deterrence. The United States Navy was successfully developing and deploying its Polaris submarine-launched ballistic missiles. These nuclear-powered submarines, capable of staying hidden beneath the oceans for months on end and launching missiles from submerged positions, offered a highly survivable and mobile deterrent. They were, in many ways, a more flexible and less geographically constrained solution than the fixed, albeit hidden, land-based system proposed for Greenland. Furthermore, land-based ICBMs were becoming more numerous, more reliable, and were being emplaced in hardened underground silos across the American Midwest, offering a different kind of survivability. The unique strategic niche that Project Iceworm was designed to fill was, therefore, diminishing. And there were also emerging concerns, albeit still highly classified, about the environmental implications and the sheer logistical burden of such a massive nuclearized undertaking in a sensitive Arctic environment. While the full extent of long-term environmental consequences wasn't understood then, as it is today, the challenges of managing nuclear materials and waste in such a remote and fragile ecosystem were undoubtedly a factor, even if not the publicly stated one. Adding to these pressures, in 1962, the world held its breath during the Cuban Missile Crisis. This terrifying standoff, which brought the United States and the Soviet Union to the very brink of nuclear war, had a sobering effect on military and political leaders. While it underscored the importance of a credible deterrent, it also highlighted the extreme dangers of escalation and the need for stable command and control, something potentially more complex with a dispersed, under-ice missile field. By 1963, the evidence was overwhelming. The US Army's report on the geoptasy program of Greenland detailed the severe ice deformation issues at Camp Century. The scientific data was irrefutable. The project was simply not feasible in the long term. Combined with the evolving strategic picture and the rise of alternative deterrent systems, the justification for continuing with the enormously expensive and technically challenging Project Iceworm evaporated. Officially, Camp Century itself was gradually phased out. The nuclear reactor was decommissioned and removed between 1963 and 1964, an incredibly complex operation in itself. The camp was used for summer-only operations for a couple more years, primarily for scientific research, including the continued ice core drilling. But the grand military ambition, the hidden nuclear city, was quietly shelved. In 1966, the United States Department of Defense officially concluded that a system of ICMS under the ice sheet was not feasible. Project Iceworm, one of the Cold War's most secret and ambitious undertakings, was abandoned, left to be slowly reclaimed by the relentless ice. Its full story still years away from public knowledge. For decades after its abandonment, the full story of Camp Century and the breathtaking ambition of Project Iceworm remained locked away, buried not just under Greenland's ice, but under layers of government secrecy and classified documents. The official narrative held Camp Century was a bold scientific experiment in Arctic living. The deeper nuclear purpose remained a closely guarded secret known only to a select few within the military and intelligence community. But secrets, especially those of such magnitude, have a way of eventually surfacing, often long after the events themselves have faded into history. The end of the Cold War in the early 1990s was a pivotal moment. With the collapse of the Soviet Union and a general thawing of international relations, governments began to slowly declassify vast archives of Cold War-era documents. Historians, researchers, and journalists started to piece together the hidden narratives of that tense period. It was in this new atmosphere of openness that details about Project Iceworm began to trickle out. The first significant public revelations came in the mid-1990s. In January 1995, the Danish Foreign Policy Institute, known by its Danish acronym DUP, was commissioned by the Danish Parliament to investigate the history of nuclear weapons on Greenland during the Cold War. This investigation was spurred, in part, by lingering questions and rumors about American activities, particularly following the 1968 crash of a B-52 bomber carrying nuclear weapons near Thule Air Base, an entirely separate but related nuclear incident that had already strained Danish-American relations. The DPI's researchers delved into archives in both Denmark and the United States. Their comprehensive report, titled Greenland During the Cold War, Danish and American Security Policy 1945 to 1968, was released in 1997. It was a landmark study, and it contained the first official, detailed confirmation from a Danish perspective of the true nature and scale of Project Iceworm. The report revealed the extent of the American plans for a massive missile deployment under the ice and, crucially, confirmed that the Danish government had never been officially informed of this nuclear aspect of Camp Century. The DUP report caused a sensation in Denmark. It raised profound questions about Danish sovereignty, the nature of the security relationship with the United States, and the extent to which a key ally had been kept in the dark about activities with potentially catastrophic implications for its territory and people. The revelations sparked political debate and a renewed public interest in this forgotten chapter of Cold War history. In the United States, more documents related to Project Iceworm and Camp Century were gradually declassified and made available through the National Archives and other sources. These internal military reports, feasibility studies, and policy memos painted an even clearer picture of the project's genesis, its ambitious goals, the engineering challenges encountered, and the reasons for its eventual cancellation. They corroborated the findings of the Danish researchers and provided a wealth of technical and strategic detail. Personal accounts from some of the soldiers, engineers, and scientists who had lived and worked at Camp Century also began to emerge, offering first-hand perspectives on life in the city under the ice. These memoirs and interviews, while often focusing on the daily routines and the unique experience of Arctic service, sometimes hinted at the larger, unspoken purpose that lay behind the official scientific mission. The unsealing of these records was a slow, piecemeal process spanning years. Each newly declassified document, each scholarly article, each investigative report added another piece to the puzzle. It was like an archaeological dig, gradually uncovering the layers of a hidden city, not of stone, but of secrets and Cold War ambitions. By the early 21st century, the broad outlines and many of the specific details of Project Iceworm were finally in the public domain, transforming our understanding of Camp Century from a quaint Arctic oddity into a profound case study of Cold War secrecy, technological overreach, and the complex interplay of military strategy and international relations. The frozen secret was at last thawing out. When Camp Century was abandoned in 1966 and the grand designs of Project Iceworm were shelved, the United States Army faced a new, albeit less glamorous, challenge: what to do with the city under the ice and everything it contained. The era was different. Environmental consciousness was not what it is today, and the prevailing assumption was not what it is today. And the prevailing assumption was that the perpetual snow and ice of Greenland would act as an eternal tomb, safely encasing whatever was left behind. This assumption, as we are now discovering, was dangerously flawed. The decommissioning of Camp Century was primarily focused on the most obvious hazard, the PM2A portable nuclear reactor. This was, by all accounts, a complex and carefully managed operation. The reactor itself was shut down, dismantled, and its components, along with contaminated materials, were packaged and shipped back to the United States for disposal. This was a significant undertaking, and by the standards of the time, it was considered a responsible approach to dealing with the nuclear aspect of the site. However, the reactor was only one part of a sprawling subterranean complex. When the camp was deserted, a considerable amount of infrastructure and waste was simply left in place, entombed within the ice. Think about what constitutes a small city: buildings, pipes, vehicles, fuel, and all the refuse generated by up to 200 people living and working there for several years. Estimates suggest that approximately 9,200 tons of physical infrastructure were abandoned. This included prefabricated buildings, miles of tunnels, and various pieces of equipment. More concerning than the inert materials was the chemical and biological waste. It's estimated that around 200,000 litres, that's over 50,000 gallons, of diesel fuel were left at the site. Diesel fuel contains numerous toxic compounds. Additionally, there were significant quantities of polychlorinated biphenyls, commonly known as PCBs. These are highly persistent and toxic industrial chemicals that were widely used in electrical equipment, coolants, and lubricants at the time. PCBs are now recognized as dangerous environmental pollutants that can accumulate in food chains and pose serious health risks. And then there was the biological waste. Camp Century, like any settlement, generated sewage. It's estimated that around 24 million litres, or over 6 million gallons, of untreated or minimally treated sewage were deposited into sumps carved into the ice, essentially becoming frozen waste pits. This sewage contains bacteria, viruses, and nutrients that, if released, could contaminate the surrounding environment. There was also a quantity of low-level radioactive waste, primarily coolant water from the PM2A reactor's secondary cooling loop. While the reactor core itself was removed, this contaminated water, estimated to be around 24,000 litres, or 6,300 gallons, was also believed to have been disposed of in sumps within the ice. At the time of abandonment, the military planners operated under the out-of-sight, out-of-mind principle, coupled with the belief in the permanence of the ice sheet. The assumption was that the continuous snowfall in central Greenland would gradually bury these wastes deeper and deeper, effectively locking them away from the environment for millennia. The ice was seen as a natural, impenetrable containment system. There was little consideration given to the possibility that the ice itself might not be as permanent as they thought, or that the glacier's natural flow, even if slow, could eventually transport these materials. For decades, this toxic ghost lay dormant, a forgotten legacy of the Cold War, its presence known to few outside specialized circles. The focus had been on the strategic implications, the secrecy, the engineering marvels. The long-term environmental bill for this icy ambition had yet to come due, but the Earth's climate, and with it the Greenland ice sheet, was beginning to change in ways that the planners of the 1960s could scarcely have imagined, setting the stage for an unwelcome re-emergence. For half a century, the abandoned remains of Camp Century and its associated wastes lay frozen and largely forgotten, a relic of a bygone era. The assumption of perpetual entombment within the Greenland ice sheet seemed secure, but then a new global reality began to assert itself with undeniable force. climate change. The rapid warming of the Arctic, a phenomenon now well documented and proceeding at a pace faster than almost anywhere else on Earth, has begun to fundamentally alter the equation for these Cold War relics. The Greenland ice sheet, once thought of as an almost eternal constant, is now losing mass at an accelerating rate. Rising global temperatures are causing increased surface melt during the summer months, and warmer ocean waters are eroding the glaciers where they meet the sea. This isn't a distant future projection, it is happening now, and this widespread melting has profound implications for sites like Camp Century. In 2016, a team of scientists published a groundbreaking study that brought the issue of Camp Century's legacy into sharp focus. Their research modeled the future of the ice sheet under various climate change scenarios. Their alarming conclusion was that, contrary to the 1960s assumption of perpetual burial, the ongoing warming trend could lead to the eventual exposure and release of the wastes abandoned at Camp Century. They projected that, if greenhouse gas emissions continue on their current trajectory, the portion of the ice sheet covering Camp Century could transition from a state of net snow accumulation to net ablation, meaning more ice melting than snow falling, within the latter half of the 21st century, perhaps as early as the year 2090. Suddenly, what was once considered safely locked away in a frozen vault could become an active environmental hazard. The melting ice could remobilize the diesel fuel, the polychlorinated biphenyls, the sewage, and the low-level radioactive coolant. These pollutants, once released, could be carried by meltwater streams across the surface of the ice, potentially reaching the sensitive coastal ecosystems and marine environments around Greenland. This could contaminate fisheries, impact wildlife, and pose risks to human populations that rely on these resources. The implications are staggering. Who was responsible for cleaning up waste left behind by one nation decades ago on the territory of another? Especially when the original agreements were shrouded in secrecy and made under entirely different environmental understandings. The original defense agreement between the United States and Denmark, which permitted the establishment of bases like Camp Century, did not explicitly address long-term environmental liability for abandoned sites in a scenario of climate-induced melt. The situation at Camp Century is not unique, though it is perhaps the most well-documented example of a Cold War military site in the Arctic facing this predicament. There are other abandoned bases and waste sites scattered across the Arctic regions of various nations, all potentially vulnerable to the impacts of a warming climate. It presents a complex tangle of legal, ethical, political, and financial challenges. The discovery that climate change could unearth these toxic ghosts has spurred further research and international discussion. Scientists are working to better understand the exact inventory of wastes, their current state within the ice, and the precise mechanisms and timelines by which they might be released. Governments are beginning to grapple with the question of responsibility and the potential need for incredibly complex and expensive remediation efforts in one of the world's most challenging environments. The collision of Cold War relics with 21st century climate change serves as a stark reminder that the consequences of past actions can reverberate for generations, often in unforeseen ways. The secret city built for a nuclear standoff, once buried by ice and secrecy, now threatens to re-emerge, not through declassification of documents, but through the melting of its icy tomb, demanding a new kind of attention and a new form of global cooperation to address its lingering, toxic legacy. Even as the ice melts and old secrets are declassified, the story of Camp Century and Project Iceworm is not entirely closed. Lingering mysteries remain, and the geopolitical echoes of this Cold War venture continue to resonate in the 21st century, particularly as the Arctic itself becomes an arena of renewed strategic interest. One of the enduring questions revolves around the full extent of materials abandoned at Camp Century, and potentially other, less documented American installations from that era in Greenland. While scientific studies have provided estimates of the waste, the exact inventory and its precise condition deep within the ice are still subjects of ongoing research and some uncertainty. Were there other experimental programs or materials present at Camp Century that have yet to come to light? Given the intense secrecy of the Cold War, it's a question that occasionally surfaces, and the issue of responsibility for the cleanup, should it become necessary as the ice retreats, remains a delicate and largely unresolved matter. The original agreements were made in a different time under different assumptions. The Danish government, and increasingly the semi-autonomous government of Greenland, have expressed concerns about the legacy wastes, navigating the diplomatic channels to determine who bears the financial and logistical burden for remediating a site abandoned over half a century ago. Under circumstances where the host nation was not fully informed of its ultimate purpose, is a complex challenge. It touches upon sensitive issues of sovereignty, historical accountability, and international environmental law. The revelations about Project Iceworm have also had a lasting impact on trust and transparency in the relationship between Denmark, Greenland, and the United States. While the strategic alliance remains strong, the knowledge that such a significant nuclear ambition was pursued in secret on Greenlandic territory has understandably led to greater scrutiny and calls for more openness regarding any ongoing or future military activity. For Greenland itself, which is striving for greater autonomy and self-determination, the legacy of Camp Century serves as a potent reminder of its strategic importance and its vulnerability during the great power rivalries of the past. Moreover, the saga of Project Iceworm has broader implications for the rapidly changing Arctic. As sea ice diminishes and new shipping routes open, and as untapped natural resources become more accessible, the Arctic is once again emerging as a region of geopolitical competition. Nations are reassessing their military postures and capabilities in the high north. The story of Camp Century provides a historical precedent, a cautionary tale perhaps, about the extremes to which nations might go to secure strategic advantage in this unique and fragile environment. It raises questions about transparency for current military buildups and the potential for new environmental challenges arising from increased activity. Are there other Camp Centuries out there from different nations with their own hidden histories and potential environmental legacies waiting to be uncovered by time or a changing climate? The Cold War was fought on many fronts, often in secret, and the full accounting of its environmental and political fallout is likely still incomplete. The echoes of Project Iceworm serve as a reminder to ask difficult questions, to demand transparency, and to consider the very long-term consequences of actions taken in the name of national security, especially in the world's most sensitive regions. The frozen past, it seems, still has the power to shape the present and future dialogue about the Arctic's governance and its fate. The story of Camp Century and Project Iceworm is a journey from audacious Cold War ambition to a looming 21st century environmental challenge. It began as a secret whispered in the highest echelons of military power, a plan to carve a nuclear fortress from the Greenland ice sheet, hidden from the world. It manifested as a city under the ice, a marvel of engineering and human endurance, yet also a deception. And it now re-emerges as a potential toxic ghost, a reminder that even the most remote and seemingly permanent landscapes are subject to change, and that the consequences of our actions can endure far longer than intended. What lessons can we draw from this frozen past? Firstly, it speaks volumes about the sheer scale of Cold War paranoia and the extraordinary lengths to which nations were prepared to go in the pursuit of security, or perceived security. The ingenuity and resources poured into projects like Iceworm were immense, driven by a genuine fear of annihilation, yet also, perhaps, by a degree of technological hubris, a belief that any environment, no matter how extreme, could be conquered and bent to human will. Secondly, Camp Century is a stark illustration of the complex relationship between science and military ambition. While genuine and valuable scientific research was conducted, its primary purpose was deeply entwined with a secret military objective. This highlights the ethical considerations that arise when scientific endeavor becomes a cover for, or a servant to, potentially hazardous or controversial strategic goals. Thirdly, the saga underscores the profound importance of transparency and democratic oversight, particularly in matters of national security and environmental stewardship. The decision to plan a nuclear missile base on the territory of an ally without their full knowledge or consent raises fundamental questions about sovereignty and trust that resonate to this day. The eventual, unintended unearthing of these secrets by a changing climate serves as a powerful, if ironic, force for accountability. Perhaps the most pressing lesson, however, lies at the intersection of past actions and present environmental realities. The assumption that the Greenland ice sheet would provide an eternal, stable tomb for abandoned waste has been shattered by the undeniable reality of climate change. It's a potent example of how decisions made with a limited understanding of long-term environmental dynamics can create complex and costly problems for future generations. The out-of-sight, out-of-mind approach to waste disposal, especially in sensitive ecosystems, is a gamble that humanity can no longer afford to take. Camp Century, the city built for a war that never came in the way it was envisioned, now serves as a different kind of monument. It is a monument to human ingenuity, yes, but also to the limits of that ingenuity when faced with the power of nature. It is a monument to the secrecy of a bygone era and to the enduring consequences that can ripple through time. As the ice continues to melt, it forces us to confront not only the physical remnants of a hidden nuclear ambition, but also the critical lessons about responsibility, foresight, and our relationship with the planet itself. The frozen past of Camp Century offers a chilling yet vital message for our warming world. Our secrets and our waste will eventually find their way to the surface. And that is it. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the Purple Files, click the like button, and drop a comment down below. More videos to come, and until then, thanks for watching.